by AGF. What are you doing after work?
So space is tight, but demand is hot. That pretty much sums up Canada's commercial real estate market for U.S. retailers looking to expand here. So with retailers like Kohl's and others reportedly on the prowl for square footage here in Canada, what are they facing? What are the challenges to hanging a shingle in Canada? Joining us are two people who work with retailers and developers to scope out new space. Rick Pennycooke is president of the Lakeshore Group, and John O'Brien is vice chairman of CB Richard Ellis. Good to have the two of you guys with me today. Thanks for coming here. So you must be run off your feet right now.
I certainly am, and I suspect John is as well. I mean, it's a very interesting time to be in this space. It's pretty exciting here, you know, looking at the real estate plays that are going on. As I've always said, my mantra is that retail is as much about real estate as it is about selling goods, and so it's a very interesting time.
So big retailers in the U.S., they would traditionally lock up space probably for decades, and now they're having to come in and find a new.
Yeah, I think it's quite a shock actually when they come up to realize that when you cross the border, it is quite different. It is this sort of oligopoly nature of our whole economy, which is
even in commercial real estate, like the banks. There's like 5 big landlords or something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, within a confine, yes. I mean, you can probably name the major landlords on 2 hands, and they can basically own a lot of the stock. So it's an interesting relationship because it's quite symbiotic. You both need each other, and that's why I think when you interviewed both your guests before and said, how did the negotiations go? They said, well, the tenant was reasonable and so were we. That tends to be the Canadian way.
Really? Because one would expect that they, meaning the American retailers, would come out and try to drive as hard a bargain as they could. And conversely, here in Canada, if you're the oligopoly and there's not a lot of space, you could drive a hard bargain too.
That's exactly what's happening. So it makes for some really interesting lease negotiations, right? Both are in strong positions, and so I think the landlords have had to move into a more partnership type of arrangement than the traditional landlord-tenant relationship. So I think that you know, having a strong punch on both sides has made for some good deals, but nobody's running away with the farm.
And so what about others that might want to come later? Like I just asked our previous guest, Jean Laramé of Ivanhoe, Cambridge, about Kohl's, for instance. It's been rumored. Target, we know, is coming. Yeah. But what about a Kohl's? Is there going to be anything left for them if and when they come?
I think you have to put a bit of a patchwork together. Your strategy will really be determined. I mean, everyone wants to go to Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, but your strategy to some extent will be determined on where there are opportunities. So taking out some old food stores or some other boxes that didn't quite work and moving stuff around. It's a bit of a scavenger hunt for space, to be honest with you. But
could they end up? Sorry, could they end up in Winnipeg then?
Yeah, but again, everyone wants to start off with the 7 big centres, which is from sort of west to east: Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. I mean, everybody wants to be there, and so you focus in on those, and then you fill in. The good news about filling in Canada, and not that many cities to fill in with, is they're all in remarkably good economic shape. These are not secondary markets from an economic point of view, just from a population point of view.
What about the kinds of distribution centers that they would normally be used to in the United States, massive distribution centers, like, for instance, the Walmarts? What about for a Target here?
Right. Well, you know, Target, there's been announced that they're opening a $1.3 million distribution center in Cornwall, Ontario. So they do
square feet.
Yes.
There? Yeah.
And so they do need distribution centers. Now, some will be able to serve the Canadian market from northern U.S. distribution centers, but again, it's a cost-benefit analysis of running the trucks and how much that's going to increase the cost of the goods.
Like over in Buffalo or northern New York?
That's right. The other thing, too, is we have a much longer land development approval process here. So the retailers run into it in terms of new stores, how long it takes to get zoning approvals, and the same thing happens with distribution centers. So they may want to come here and set up a distribution center, but they may be at the rezoning process for a couple of years, and they may have to serve the Canadian market from a northern U.S. location.
What about developing new space? That was something I spoke with Jean about as well, and he said there was a big build-out of construction in the U.S. before the recession. Are we going to have a big build-out here too?
I think it helps. But as Rick said, the biggest issue you have in Canada that you don't face in most jurisdictions, then you do in some, like San Francisco, Boston, those type of markets, but in most of their jurisdictions, planning is a lot simpler, development controls are a lot simpler, and sheer cost of space is cheaper. I mean, one of the things that hits an American retailer when he comes up here is it's more expensive to do business up here. Because of all of those controls, development is more expensive to do. So you need better margins. Now, the good news is they get better margins up here. Their sales are probably 20 to 25% higher than they would be in an equivalent U.S. retail outlet, and that definitely helps.
Why is that? Is that because they're charging Canadians more?
Not why, because the cost base is higher, but the other part of it, too, is that there is definitely some premiums here because you don't have as much retail here. In the U.S., you'd be about 23, 24 square feet per person. Canada would be about 16. So there isn't the same competitive pressure in Canada that there would be in the U.S. And a lot of these offshore retailers that we see fairly late go to the U.S. first. So they've got a lot of other competition down there as well.
What about the changing face of the malls? What about the number of Apple stores, for instance, that have opened up over the past couple of years? They're very different, and they create a totally different tenor in these malls.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the traditional design was what we used to call the barbell. You know, you'd have two anchors, you know, a department store and a big food store, and then a row of smaller stores in between. And now we're finding that the malls have multiple anchors, you know, 5 or 6 big box stores. And so it is a completely different physical plant that's going on. And a lot of internal malls have been going through something called demalling, where they're basically turning themselves into a big box outlet or a power center format where they were a traditional internal mall before.
Okay, gents, unfortunately we're out of time. So much more to talk about, but we appreciate the two of you coming in. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
That's John O'Brien of CB Richard Ellis and Rick Pennycooke of the Lakeshore Group. That is it for Headline. If you missed any of today's show, catch it online at bnn.ca. Also, any comments, please send us an email at headline@bnn.ca. And if you like, you can check out my Twitter page. You can find me at Howard Green BNN to see my tweets and updates about the show. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.